When I picked up the phone to ask my son Ethan when his wedding would be, my daughter-in-law Mara looked me straight in the eye with a cold smile. "Oh, we got married yesterday. We only invited special people." Those words hit me like a bucket of ice water. Special people. I, the one who had spent 3 years covering their $500 monthly rent, buying every piece of furniture for their apartment, and filling the refrigerator whenever they had nothing to eat, wasn't considered special. I stood frozen in the living room of my own house, holding the phone as if it weighed 1,000 pounds, watching Ethan avoid my gaze while Mara lounged comfortably on the sofa I had bought for them. The pale blue shirt I had chosen to wear to my son's wedding hung useless in my closet, beside a new pair of leather shoes and the illusion that I would share in the most important day of my only child's life. I had spent nearly $200 on that shirt, picturing how I might look in Ethan's wedding photos. Photos I now knew I'd never appear in. For weeks, I had prepared every detail, setting aside $1,000 as a wedding gift, calling my sister Clara in Seattle to share the good news, and cleaning every corner of my home, hoping that after the ceremony they would stop by for a family meal. All of it collapsed in a single moment because of those 4 cruel words, "only special people." Finally, Ethan raised his eyes, his voice sounding rehearsed. "Dad, it was just a private ceremony. Very small. Only the 2 of us and a witness." But I knew it was a lie. I had seen the photos on social media. Mara beaming beside her parents, her siblings raising glasses of champagne, and Mara's white gown gleaming in the afternoon sun, while I stood on the outside, nothing more than a forgotten father. The dress I had helped pay for, with the $800 I'd given Mara last month for her personal expenses, now felt like a sharp blade in my mind. I had seen things I was never meant to see. The photos, the congratulations, all the evidence of a ceremony they had deliberately kept me out of. A week later, exactly 7 days after that humiliation, Mara called me with a completely different voice. She was no longer the confident woman who had erased me from their most important day. Now she sounded as if she might collapse, her voice almost pleading, "Dad? Ethan, the rent is overdue. The landlord is pressing us. If we don't pay this week, he'll throw us out. Dad, you forgot the transfer." Her voice trembled as though the whole world was tilting. I stayed silent for a few seconds, letting memories rush back. All the times I'd hurried to the bank. All the times I'd canceled my own plans just to make sure they had a roof over their heads. The nights I'd settled for beans and rice so I could free up money to satisfy their endless wants. And now, after shutting me out of the most important moment of their lives, they dared to call me as if nothing had happened. "Mara," I said, my voice so calm it surprised even me, "I warned you. I only help people who are truly special." The silence on the other end was so deep I could hear my own heartbeat. For the first time in years, it wasn't me trembling. It was her. "Dad, I don't understand," Mara stammered. "We've always been special to you. You're like a second father to me." Lies. All of it lies, wrapped in that sweet tone she only used when she wanted something. The same tone that had persuaded me to hand over money for her wedding dress, for the honeymoon, for the rings, the very rings I had helped pay for, not knowing I would never witness the exchange. For years I had walked on eggshells, measuring every word, every gesture, every gift, hoping to earn a sliver of warmth from my only son. I had played the part of the devoted father, the quiet provider who never protested when they treated me as though I were invisible. But those words, "only special people," woke something in me that had been sleeping far too long. That night, I sat down and added up the money I'd spent on them over the past 3 years. Rent, food, gifts, emergencies, countless extras, totaling more than $20,000. $20,000 I had taken from my retirement fund, from the savings meant to give me a peaceful old age, from the money my late wife had left so I could live my final years in comfort. And for what? To be treated as a stranger at my own son's wedding. That night, after hanging up, I sat on the edge of my bed and cried. But they weren't tears of simple sadness. They were tears of anger, of disappointment, of all the years I had silently endured humiliation. I cried for every moment when my love had been treated as a burden, my presence as an obstacle, and my money as the only thing of value I had to offer. I cried for the foolish father who had lost himself, trying to make himself indispensable to people who never valued him. When I woke the next morning, something inside me had shifted. It wasn't just the pain of betrayal. It was something deeper, colder, a quiet resolve. I stepped into the bathroom and looked at my reflection. The same tired eyes, the same wrinkles telling the story of long years. But somewhere in that gaze, a spark had come, alive, to give love and receive nothing in return. But this time, there was something different in my eyes, a hardness I hadn't noticed before, a resolve long buried beneath years of compliance. I walked into the kitchen and brewed coffee, just as I had every morning for 40 years. But today I didn't think about calling Ethan to ask if he'd slept well. I didn't check my phone, hoping for a message apologizing for yesterday's humiliation. For the first time in a long while, I was the first priority of my own day. I sat down at the table where I used to plan surprises for them, where I once tallied their bills and quietly wept over their indifference. Now this table would bear witness to something entirely different. I pulled out my checkbook, my bank statements, and began calculating. I wanted to see the exact numbers, the measure of my own foolishness. Rent, $500 a month, times 36 months, $18,000. Food and household items, $200 a month, totaling $7,500. Birthday, Christmas, and anniversary gifts, at least $3,000. Mara's medical emergency, $800. The car loan they never repaid, $2,500. Air conditioner repair in their apartment, $600. Living room furniture, $1,200. Altogether, $3,400. That was the precise sum I had generously, or rather recklessly, poured away. $33,400 taken from the inheritance my wife left me, from my pension, from the savings I had built penny by penny through decades of honest work. All of it thrown out to support two adults so comfortable they no longer bothered to feign respect. The phone rang and Ethan's name flashed on the screen. Normally my heart would race as I scrambled to answer, hoping my son might finally apologize, explain it had all been a misunderstanding. But this time I let it ring once, twice, 3 times, then fall silent. I kept sipping my coffee as if nothing had happened. 10 minutes later it rang again. Mara this time. I let it go unanswered. Soon after, a text from Ethan appeared. "Dad, please pick up. We need to talk." I deleted the message without replying. At 2 in the afternoon, I decided to take a walk. I hadn't done that in months. Not for myself, anyway. There had always been errands tied to them, the bank for transfers, the supermarket for something they needed, the pharmacy for Mara's prescriptions. Today I walked simply because I wanted to. I passed the park where I used to take Ethan as a boy. I remembered the sweet little kid who once hugged me tight and said I was the best dad in the world. When had he become a man who treated me like an emotional ATM? When had I begun confusing love with money? When had I started believing I had to buy my own son's affection? At the bank, the place I'd trudged to so many times to set up automatic transfers, I paused at the entrance. Through the glass, I saw the branch manager, Mr. Klein, wave to me. We'd known each other for years. He had handled every transfer I made for Ethan and Mara, watching my account dwindle month after month to fill theirs. I stepped inside and walked straight to his office. "Mr. Klein," I said, my voice steady, "I need to cancel all the automatic transfers I've set up." He looked at me, surprised. For 3 years, those payments had gone out as reliably as the sunrise. Mr. Morgan, are you sure? Has something happened? His concern was genuine, more genuine than anything Ethan had offered me in months. I nodded slowly. What happened, I said quietly, is that I just remembered I still have a life of my own. At last, I truly opened my eyes. I want to cancel everything, I told Mr. Klein, and I also want information on how to secure my accounts. I don't want anyone else to have access to my money. While Mr. Klein busied himself with the cancellations, my phone vibrated nonstop. Ethan, then Mara, then Ethan again. It was as if they'd developed a radar to sense when their income stream was in danger. I pressed the button and shut the phone off completely. Mr. Morgan, Mr. Klein said, handing me a stack of papers to sign, forgive me if I'm overstepping, but over the years I've seen how generous you are with your family. I just hope no one is forcing you to make these changes. His words touched something deep inside me. This man, who knew me only through bank transactions, was showing more genuine concern for my well-being than my own son had in months. No one's pressuring me, Mr. Klein, I replied calmly. On the contrary, I've finally stopped pressuring myself. Leaving the bank, I felt an odd lightness, as though I'd left a massive weight behind in that office. For the first time in years, my money was truly mine. I no longer owed anything to people who saw me as a resource rather than as a person. I walked home slowly, thinking about all the things I'd given up to keep Ethan and Mara comfortable. The trips I never took to save for them, the friends I'd stopped seeing because I was always on standby for their emergencies, the hobbies I had abandoned because every dollar I spent on myself was one less for their demands. When I reached my house, 3 cars were parked out front, Ethan's, Mara's, and one I didn't recognize. Through the window, I caught movement in my living room. A chill shot down my spine. They had keys I had handed over willingly, believing that one day they would look after me as I had cared for them. I drew a deep breath, my hand resting on the doorknob. It was time for the first real confrontation of this new life I was building. I pushed the door open, and the sight before me is one I'll never forget. Ethan sat on my sofa, his head buried in his hands, as if carrying a burden of his own making. Mara was pacing the living room like a caged animal, while an older man I had never seen before was bent over, rifling through papers on my dining table. My papers, my personal documents. What exactly is going on here? I asked, my voice louder than I expected. All 3 of them turned to look at me, as if I were the intruder in my own home. Mara spoke first, her voice carrying the same desperate urgency I'd heard over the phone. Oh, thank God you're here, Dad. We need to talk. This is Mr. Fisher, from the law firm we consulted, about your situation. My situation? The words left my mouth dry but edged with steel. He, a man in his 50s, wearing a gray suit, with a tentative smile that inspired no confidence, stepped forward and extended his hand. Mr. Morgan, I'm Dr. Fisher, a family law attorney. Your son and daughter-in-law are very concerned about your mental well-being, and they've asked me to come and assess things. I didn't take his hand. Instead, I strode straight to the dining table, gathering up every document he'd been scrutinizing without my permission. These are my private papers, I said evenly, though my voice was firm. You don't have the right to look at them without my consent. Dad, Ethan interjected, using that patronizing tone he'd perfected over the years. We're just worried about you. I looked at my only son, the same eyes that once belonged to an innocent boy, now cloud-eyed with financial panic. For a long moment, I stood there, then set the stack of papers down, steadying my breath. Worried about me? I repeated slowly, each word deliberate. Interesting. Your concern happens to coincide perfectly with the moment I protected my accounts. Dad, your behavior lately has been strange, Ethan began, his voice trying to stay calm but tinged with irritation. First, you cut off all financial support without a word. Then you stopped answering our calls. We think you might need professional help. Mara stepped closer, reaching for my hand with that feigned tenderness she always used whenever she wanted something. "Dad, we know you've been under a lot of stress," she said, her tone syrupy. "Maybe loneliness is affecting you more than you realize. At your age, bouts of confusion are normal." The word confusion rang in my head like an alarm bell. Now I understood why they had brought a lawyer. This wasn't about helping me. It was about declaring me mentally incompetent and seizing control of my finances. The woman who once told me only special people were invited to her wedding was now treating me as though I were some doddering old fool. "I'm not confused," I said firmly, and the room went silent. "On the contrary, I'm clearer than I've been in years, and right now, the three of you need to leave my house." Mr. Fisher stepped in, adopting that measured tone lawyers use when they want to sound reasonable. "Mr. Morgan, I understand you're feeling overwhelmed, but your son and daughter-in-law have the right to intervene if they believe your ability to manage finances is impaired. They've noted some troubling behaviors." A dry, almost bitter laugh escaped my throat. "Troubling behaviors? Like what? Deciding my money belongs to me? Choosing to stop funding the lives of two adults who treat me like garbage?" Mara shot up from her seat as if I'd slapped her. "We've never treated you badly," she protested, eyes flashing. "You're part of this family. Everything you have will belong to us someday. We're just moving the process along." Her words landed like a blade, raw and unvarnished. Everything I have will one day belong to them. In that moment, I realized that, in their eyes, I'd been gone for years. They were simply gathering the inheritance before my body caught up. Whether I had 70 years or 70 days left didn't matter. To them, I was just a walking ATM that had started to malfunction. "Get out," I said, voice cold as ice, pointing toward the door. All three stared at me in stunned silence. Ethan finally stood, his face twisted with the petulant anger of a child denied a toy. "Dad, we can't just leave like this." "Dad, you have obligations to us," Ethan said, his voice starting to fray. "Rent, the car loan, the credit card you co-signed. You can't just cut us off from all of that." "Day after day, I've done exactly that," I replied, my voice rising for the first time during the whole exchange. "Who says I can't? For years, I've paid rent on an apartment that didn't even have my name on the lease. I've kept a refrigerator stocked in a house where I wasn't welcome. I've bankrolled a life that clearly had no place for me." Mr. Fisher opened his leather briefcase, pulled out a file, and set it on my table. "Mr. Morgan," he said with the calm tone of someone used to negotiations, "we've prepared some documents that might make this transition easier, a power of attorney, just temporary, so Ethan and Mara can manage your finances until you're feeling better." I picked up the folder without opening it and tossed it straight into the trash. "The only transition happening here," I said coldly, "is you moving through that front door." Mara began to cry, but they weren't tears of sorrow. They were tears of frustration, of barely contained rage. "Dad, you can't do this to us," she said, her voice trembling. "We've relied on you. We planned our lives around your support. We've shopped. We've taken on financial commitments because we knew we could count on you." "Those commitments were built on my money," I answered slowly, emphasizing each word. "Not on my health, not on my happiness, not on my companionship, only my money. And now that I've decided it's better spent on my own life, suddenly I'm an old man too confused to manage his affairs?" Ethan tried to step toward me, but I backed away, keeping my ground. He was no longer the boy who once ran into my arms after a nightmare. Standing before me now was a grown man, his eyes full of calculation, anger, and the fear of losing something he'd always taken for granted. He was a 35-year-old man who saw his own father as an obstacle standing between him and a life of comfort, funded by someone else. "Dad, we made mistakes," Ethan said, his voice carefully shaped to sound remorseful. "The wedding was just a misunderstanding. Mara was nervous, and I was under pressure. We can fix this if you're willing to be reasonable." Reasonable? The word tasted bitter on my tongue. Reasonable meant continuing to bankroll his life, while he treated me like a stranger, pretending it didn't wound me to be excluded from the most important day of my only son's life. Mr. Fisher began packing his papers with the efficiency of someone used to having proposals rejected. "Mr. Morgan," he said evenly, "this isn't the end of the matter. Your family has legal options. If a court believes you're making unsound decisions due to mental health concerns, a judge could appoint a guardian to oversee your affairs." His words landed like a punch to the chest. I realized then this wasn't just a manipulative family visit. It was a genuine legal threat. They wanted to declare me unfit to manage my own life. I met his gaze, holding it steady. "Mr. Fisher," I said, my voice firm, "I advise you to think very carefully before threatening a 71-year-old man who has managed his finances perfectly for 40 years, who raised his son alone after his wife's death, ran a household, worked honorably until retirement, and, up until last week, still supported 2 fully capable adults." The room went still. Mara's tears stopped. Ethan looked away. Fisher snapped his briefcase shut, clearly weighing his next move. But I knew. This time, every escape route they'd counted on had just been closed. Mara wiped her tears, her gaze turning cold, finally revealing her true face. "This won't last forever, Dad," she said, her voice edged with defiance. "We have rights, and we have lawyers." "Perfect," I replied, calm but with a sharpness in my eyes. "Hire as many attorneys as you like, of course with your own money. Mine is no longer available to fund your legal crusades." They exchanged glances, then all 3 headed for the door, carrying the wounded pride of people unaccustomed to being told no. Before leaving, Ethan turned back, clinging to the last shred of authority. "Dad, this is going to end badly for you. You'll be lonely, with no one to care for you when you really need it." I looked straight at my son, my voice tinged with sorrow, but clear as crystal. "I've been lonely already, Ethan. The difference now is that it's by my choice, not because you abandoned me." Closing the door behind them, I stood in the living room, surrounded by the most beautiful silence I'd heard in years. It wasn't the silence of isolation, it was the silence of freedom. That night, I couldn't sleep, not from sadness or regret, but from the adrenaline of reclaiming control over my own life. I lay awake, mapping out my next steps like a general preparing for battle. If Ethan and Mara wanted a fight, I would give them one, but it would be fought with reason, not anger. At 6 a.m., I was dressed and ready. My first stop, the office of Mr. Weber, the attorney who had helped me settle my wife's estate years ago. Unlike Fisher, the man my children had dragged in, Weber had an impeccable reputation and specialized in protecting the rights of older adults. "Mr. Morgan," Weber said as I finished explaining everything, "what your son and daughter-in-law tried yesterday is more common than you think. It's called financial elder abuse, and it's a criminal offense. They're entering your home without permission and rifling through your personal documents also counts as a violation." His words steadied me, but they also stirred a new unease. This battle wouldn't be simple, yet at least now I wouldn't be standing alone without the law on my side. Mr. Weber's words both calmed me, because they confirmed I wasn't losing my mind, that what had happened yesterday was in fact financial abuse, and unsettled me as I realized the situation was more serious than I'd imagined. "We need to document everything," Weber continued, his eyes steady. "Every transfer, every gift, every time they pressured you to pay. We'll also revise your will to safeguard your assets from future manipulation." We spent 3 hours reviewing my financial records. When he saw the total, $33,400 over 3 years, Weber let out a quiet whistle. "Mr. Morgan, with that money you could have lived comfortably, traveled, enjoyed your retirement. Instead, you financed the entire lifestyle of 2 adults who didn't even respect you enough to invite you to their wedding." Leaving Weber's office, I had a clear plan. Step 1, replace every lock in my house. Step 2, Install a security system with cameras to protect against any surprise visits. Step 3. Open a new account at a bank they couldn't trace. And fourth, most important, begin living the life I'd put on hold for far too long. My next stop was the hardware store. Mr. Summer, the owner, looked up as I walked in, greeting me with a familiar smile. For years I'd come here to buy tools to repair things in Ethan and Mara's apartment. But today was different. Mr. Morgan, what's the emergency this time? Something else for your son? Summer asked, with the easy tone of someone who had quietly witnessed my reckless generosity. I shook my head, a new resolve lighting my face. No, Mr. Summer, I said. This time it's for my house. I want every lock replaced, and I want the best you've got. Mr. Summer looked at me with mild surprise, but asked no questions. While I was choosing the best locks, his son, Ethan, who installed security systems, walked in. Providence, I thought, was on my side. Ethan, I said, I also want a full surveillance system installed. Cameras, the works. Price isn't an issue. The Summers began taking notes, scheduling the installation for the next day. As they wrapped up, my phone rang. An unfamiliar number. I answered, and a familiar voice came through. Mara, calling from someone else's phone because I'd blocked hers after yesterday. What is it, Mara? I asked dryly. Renat, please don't hang up, she pleaded. Let's talk like civilized adults. Listen, I know you're upset about the wedding. That was a mistake. Max and I talked, and we want to make it up to you. Let's have a special dinner to celebrate the wedding. At your house, like old times, cooking together. The manipulation in her tone was so transparent I nearly laughed. Mara, exactly how much rent do you owe? I cut in. There was silence, then a sigh. 2 months. $1,000 total, she admitted quietly. But I'm not just calling for that, Renat. Truly, we miss having you in our lives. You miss me? I asked slowly. Or you miss my money? A brief pause, then Mara replied with surprising honesty. Both. I won't lie to you. Yes, we need your financial help, but we also love you. You matter to us. I leaned back in my chair, half closing my eyes. Her words, though soft, exposed the heart of it all. In their world, affection and money had never been separate. Important, I said, my voice calm but carrying a cold edge. Why wasn't I important enough to be at your wedding? Why wasn't I important enough to get a phone call that didn't involve money? When was the last time you called just to ask how I was? Another silence. We both knew the answer. Never. Mara, explain it to me, I continued, my tone heavy yet steady. For 3 years, you've treated me like an emotional ATM. You've used me, ignored me, humiliated me, and finally you shamed me in the worst way possible. Now that the money's gone, suddenly you've discovered you love me. Let's be clear, I've cut that cord. There's nothing left. I ended the call and powered my phone off completely. Today was my day, a day to free myself from the invisible chains I'd let bind me for far too long. That afternoon, I went to the salon I hadn't visited in over a year. I'd always canceled appointments because Ethan or Mara needed something urgently, or because the money I'd set aside for myself became an emergency fund for them. Mr. Morgan, what a surprise, Cynthia, my favorite stylist, exclaimed as I walked in. I thought you'd forgotten us. I didn't forget, Cynthia, I smiled. I just forgot that I deserve care, too. I let them do everything. Haircut, color, manicure, pedicure. For the first time in years, I spent money on myself without guilt. As Cynthia worked on my hair, she talked about her life, her children, her dreams. It was refreshing to hear a conversation that didn't revolve around Ethan and Mara's demands. You look wonderful, Mr. Morgan, Cynthia said when she finished. But more than that, you look free. Something good must have happened. Yes, Cynthia, I replied, a slow smile spreading across my face. I finally learned how to say no. When I returned home later that afternoon, there was a car parked in front of my house that I didn't recognize. My heart skipped. For a moment I worried Ethan and Mara had come back with reinforcements. But as I approached, I saw an elderly woman sitting calmly on my porch steps. "Mr. Morgan?" she asked as I stepped out of the car. "Yes, that's me," I answered evenly. "Can I help you?" "I'm Eleanor Brooks," she said, smiling gently. "I've just moved in next door." "We've been neighbors for years," Eleanor Brooks said gently, "but we've never really had a chance to talk. Yesterday I heard raised voices in your house, and I was worried. Are you all right?" Her genuine concern caught me off guard. Here was a stranger who cared more about my well-being than my own son ever had. "Come in, Mrs. Brooks," I said, opening the door. "I'll make you a cup of coffee and tell you a story you might not believe." As I brewed the coffee, I recounted everything. Eleanor listened quietly, only nodding now and then, never interrupting. When I finished, her eyes were misty. "Mr. Morgan," she said, "you did the right thing. 5 years ago, I went through something similar with my daughter. I believed I had a duty to fund her adult life, convinced that if I didn't give money, I wouldn't be loved. Then I realized she only called when she wanted something. I finally stopped. At first, it was awful. She sulked, threatened, tried to make me feel guilty. But after 6 months, my daughter called back with a genuine apology. Now we have a relationship built on love, not money." Her words gave me hope and confirmed I'd made the right decision. "Do you think Ethan and Mara will ever understand?" I asked. "Maybe, or maybe not," she replied honestly. "But that's no longer your responsibility, Mr. Morgan. Your responsibility now is to live your own life." That night, for the first time in 3 years, I went to bed without worrying about whether Max and Mara had rent money, food, or funds for their whims. I thought about myself, my plans, my future, and slept better than I had in years. The next morning, Ethan Summer and his father arrived at 8 to change the locks and install the security system. While they worked, my phone rang again and again from unfamiliar numbers. Mara was still trying to reach me from different phones, but I'd learned a new skill, ignoring calls that didn't deserve my peace. "Mr. Morgan," Ethan said as he mounted a camera, "this system will give you complete peace of mind. You'll be able to see anyone approaching your house, even when you're not home. And if someone breaks in without permission, an alert will automatically go to the police." I couldn't ignore the irony. I was installing security to protect myself from my own son. Yet it no longer hurt. It was simply a practical step to safeguard the peace I'd fought for. While they worked, I decided to do something I hadn't done in years. Call my sister Diana in Chicago. We drifted apart because every time we spoke, I would talk about Ethan and Mara's achievements, about the money I'd spent on them, about how proud I was to help. Now I understood those conversations had been financial reports disguised as family news. "Renat?" Diana answered, surprise in her voice. "Are you all right? It's been months since we talked." "I'm fine, Diana," I said, smiling at a joy she couldn't see. "Better than fine, and I'm calling to tell you some news." At last I truly woke up. I told Diana everything: the secret wedding, the humiliation, the meeting with the lawyer, my decision to cut off their financial support. Diana listened quietly, never interrupting. When I finished, her reply stunned me. "Renat, it's about time," she said gently but firmly. "Every time we talked, it broke my heart to hear you brag about how much you'd given them, as if love could be measured in dollars. I wanted to tell you, but I never knew how." "What did you want to say?" I asked. "Max never said anything truly kind about you whenever I saw him at family gatherings," Diana continued. "It was always, 'Dad helped me with this,' or 'Dad bought me that.' Never once did I hear him say he loved you. To him, you were a service provider, not a person." Her words hurt, but it was the kind of pain I needed, like a doctor cleaning an infected wound. It stings, but it's part of healing. "And there's something else," Diana added slowly. "Mara always spoke of you in the future tense. When Renat's gone, we can fix up his house. Or, when we inherit, we'll invest in this or that. It's as if they're waiting for you to die so they can really live." The realization hit me like a bucket of ice water. They hadn't just seen me as an ATM. To them, I was a temporary obstacle standing between them and money they believed was already theirs. While I'd been trying to make them happy, they'd been planning a future without me. After hanging up, I sat in the kitchen, letting it all sink in. 35 years of raising a son alone after losing my wife, and 3 years of using my retirement savings to support two adults who saw me as $100,000 roadblock. The doorbell rang. On my new security monitor, I saw Eleanor standing there holding a mug. I opened the door and she handed me a cup of freshly brewed coffee. "I thought you might need a little company after everything you shared with me yesterday," she said with a warm, sincere smile, the kind of smile I hadn't realized I missed. We sat in my living room and Eleanor told me more of her own story. "My daughter said almost the same things Mara said to you. You're like a second mom to us. We're special to you. One day, everything you have will belong to us." All lines straight out of some emotional manipulation manual. "Do you think such a handbook really exists?" I asked, half joking. "Not officially," Eleanor chuckled wryly, "but everyone seems to read from the same script. Chapter 1, make the parent feel indispensable. Chapter 2, create constant financial emergencies. Chapter 3, if the parent resists, question their mental state." We laughed, though there was bitterness in it. It was both funny and tragic to recognize such familiar patterns in our own children. "Do you ever feel guilty about cutting them off?" I asked Eleanor. "Every day for the first 3 months," she admitted, "but then I started seeing results. My daughter took a second job. Her husband stopped spending weekends on the golf course and began looking for extra work. They learned to live within their means. More importantly, they learned I'm a person, not a resource. That afternoon, I decided to do something I'd put off for years: visit Robert's grave. I'd always found excuses. Ethan or Mara needed something urgently, or I'd convinced myself investing in one of their emergencies was more important. The cemetery was quiet, beautiful. Robert's headstone looked a little neglected. I hadn't been there to tidy it in months. I sat on the grass beside it and spoke to him as if he were still there. "Robert, my love," I said softly, "you know, I think I lost myself for a while. After you left, I poured everything into Max. I just wanted to be the best father in the world, thinking somehow I could make up for you not being here. But somewhere along the way, I forgot myself." A light breeze brushed past as if he were whispering back. In that moment, I felt I was slowly rediscovering the man Robert once loved, and the father I was meant to be for myself. It felt as though Robert was listening to me. Our son has become someone I barely recognize. Or maybe he was always this way and I just refused to see it. "The wife he chose. You know," I murmured toward the headstone. "The money you left so I could live in peace. I spent it taking care of them. But not any more, my love. I've learned." I tidied the grave, replaced the wilted flowers with fresh ones, then sat for another hour, simply enjoying the calm. For the first time in years, I didn't have to rush home to manage a crisis for Ethan and Mara. Driving back, my heart jumped for a moment. 3 unfamiliar cars were parked outside my house. This time, though, I was prepared. The security cameras showed Ethan, Mara, and 2 strangers talking, pointing toward my house. I stayed inside my car and called Mr. Weber. "Mr. Weber, they're here again, this time with others. What should I do?" "Mr. Morgan, don't leave your car," he replied firmly. "I'll come right over and call the police. After our talk yesterday, I requested a temporary restraining order. They're not allowed on your property." Minutes later, Weber arrived with 2 patrol cars. I watched the officers speak with Ethan and Mara. I saw my son waving his arms angrily, Mara crying again, but this time her tears didn't move me. One officer approached my car. "Sir, you can step out safely now. They'll be leaving shortly." I got out, maintaining a calm that even surprised me. Ethan shouted from the street, "Dad, this is ridiculous. We're family. You can't call the police on your own son." "Family," I replied evenly, "doesn't threaten to sue their father for incompetence. Family doesn't break into someone's home uninvited. Family doesn't treat their parent like an ATM. From across the road, Mara yelled, "You'll have to pay us everything you owe. We have invoices you co-signed. You can't just abandon us like this." Mr. Weber stepped forward, his voice crisp and professional. "Any future communication must go through my office, and I strongly suggest you speak with counsel before making further demands. My client has thorough documentation of every voluntary payment made over the past 3 years." I watched them drive away, defeated but not ready to quit. I knew this wasn't over, but for the first time, I felt confident. I had professional support in Weber, the steady kindness of Eleanor, and most importantly, the clarity to tell right from wrong. That evening, Eleanor invited me to dinner at her house. Her daughter was visiting, and I finally saw with my own eyes what a healthy family looked like. They spoke to each other with respect, asked sincere questions about one another's lives, and laughed together. Not once did her daughter mention money throughout the meal. In that warm atmosphere, I sensed something new, a future no longer clouded by worry over Ethan and Mara, but one I could shape myself, where my peace and dignity came first. "I want that with Ethan, too," I admitted to Eleanor after her daughter had left. "And you might, one day," she replied softly. "But first he has to understand that you deserve respect, that you're more than just a source of money." For the first time in weeks, I went to bed with a heart full of hope for the future. The next few days passed in an oddly peaceful way. The cameras showed Ethan and Mara driving past my house several times a day, sometimes slowly, sometimes stopping for a few minutes, but never getting out. It was as if they were studying my habits, waiting for the perfect moment to make their next move. Mr. Weber had advised me to record every visit, so I kept a careful log with dates and times. "Their persistence will work in our favor," he said. "Each time they appear after being told to stay away, it strengthens our case for a permanent order." On Friday morning, I was calmly having breakfast when the doorbell rang. The monitor showed a neatly dressed young woman holding a folder, her professional smile revealing little warmth. I didn't recognize her, but something in her posture told me this wasn't a casual call. "Good morning, Mr. Morgan," she said as I opened the door. "I'm a social investigator from the Office of Elder Services. We've received a report suggesting you may be having difficulty caring for yourself, and we need to conduct a wellness check." My blood ran cold. Ethan and Mara had escalated things. This was no longer just private legal threats. They had brought the government into it. "May I see your identification before we continue?" I asked, keeping my voice steady even as my hands tightened inside my pockets. She took a breath, trying to stay calm. "Of course," she said, then handed me an official-looking badge that seemed legitimate. "I'm a social worker. Schmidt," she introduced herself. "May I come in and speak with you?" I let her in, knowing that a refusal could make things worse. Schmidt sat down in my living room and pulled a form from her folder. "Mr. Morgan," she began, her tone professional but cool, "we've received reports that you've made significant changes to your financial behavior, that you've cut off contact with your family, installed unnecessary security systems, and refused medical or legal support from loved ones. These details suggest you may be having difficulty caring for yourself." Each word had been carefully chosen to make me sound like an unstable old man. I recognized Mara's fingerprints all over the phrasing. She'd always been skilled at shaping stories to get what she wanted. "Ms. Schmidt," I said, summoning every ounce of composure I had, "I'd like to call my attorney before we proceed." "Sir, this isn't a legal interrogation," she replied smoothly. "It's just a wellness check. If you have nothing to hide, talking to me shouldn't be a problem." The phrase, "if you have nothing to hide," lit a fire in me. The same logic abusers use to justify invading someone's privacy. "I'll be calling my lawyer," I said firmly. "You're welcome to wait here or return later, but I won't answer further questions without legal representation." I called Weber, and within 20 minutes he arrived. The moment he saw Schmidt, his expression hardened. Ms. Schmidt, he said after examining her credentials, I trust you have a court order for this visit? My client is under my legal protection, and any investigation outside proper authority constitutes harassment. Schmidt hesitated, her voice less steady now. We received reports from family members concerned about Mr. Morgan's safety. It's our duty to check in. Family? Weber's voice was dry. The same family who tried to get him to sign over power of attorney without counsel. The ones who entered his home uninvited and rifled through private papers. The ones who excluded him from major events while living off his money. Weber opened a folder and placed it on the table. Here's full documentation of the financial and emotional abuse my client has endured. Over 33,400 Lauren drained from his accounts in 3 years, along with systematic social exclusion and emotional blackmail. If anyone here merits investigation, it isn't my client. Schmidt reviewed the papers, her unease growing. Clearly, the report she'd been given didn't match the reality in front of her. Mr. Morgan, she asked after a pause, can you explain why you abruptly stopped supporting your son financially? Because I discovered they were exploiting me, I answered simply. Because I realized that to them I wasn't a father, just a wallet, and because I'm tired of funding the lives of people who see me as an obstacle. But don't you feel responsible for helping your family? She asked, her voice softer. My duty as a father was to raise my son, educate him, give him the tools to be independent, I said. He's 35, married, and fully capable of earning his own living. Supporting an adult isn't my obligation. It was a choice, and I've chosen to stop, Weber interjected. Ms. Schmidt, do you consider it reasonable for a 35-year-old man to be unable to pay rent without the help of his 71-year-old father? Schmidt didn't reply right away. I could see her reassessing everything. Mr. Morgan, she said at last, based on this conversation and the documentation I've reviewed, I see no signs that you're at risk or in need of intervention. I'll be closing this case. After she left, Weber and I sat in silence for a few moments. Renat, he finally said, this is going to keep escalating. Ethan and Mara are spending money they don't have, hiring professionals to try to get you declared incompetent. So they're desperate? I asked. Exactly. Weber nodded. And when desperate people run out of options, they can do almost anything. Mr. Weber looked me straight in the eye. They could file a petition to have you declared incompetent. It's expensive and difficult to win, but if they find a sympathetic judge and a psychiatrist willing to testify on their behalf, they might get a guardian appointed. The thought made my skin crawl. They could try to seize what was left of my money. But, Weber added, we have solid records proving you're fully capable. Their actions are driven by greed, not genuine concern. That afternoon, I called Diana to unburden myself. Sis, I asked, after everything you've heard, do you think they'd go as far as it takes just to get at the money? Renat, she said, her voice tinged with sorrow but steady. They're risking everything. Family ties, reputations, money, just to get back into your bank account. Her words sank deep. Max and Mara had revealed their true selves. There was no way back, no real chance at reconciliation. To them, I had never been a father to respect, only a source of funds. That realization, though painful, was liberating. I no longer doubted my decision. I no longer felt guilty for protecting myself. They had made it clear that my peace of mind meant less to them than my money. That evening, Eleanor arrived with a small surprise. She'd brought a few friends from her gardening club. Renat, she said warmly, let me introduce you. Here's Cynthia, whom you met at the salon, and this is Maria, Carmen, and Elfrida. We've all had to deal with relatives who cross the line. We gathered around the kitchen table, sharing our stories. Maria spoke of the boundaries she'd had to set with a brother who always wanted to borrow money. Carmen described cutting ties with a cousin who turned every visit into a financial demand. Elfrida laughed ruefully as she recalled how her eldest son once pressured her into signing a so-called support agreement that became a lifelong obligation. As I listened, I realized I wasn't alone. These people had endured the same wounds and had found their way back to freedom and dignity. Amid the warm hum of conversation, I felt something I hadn't in years, a sense of belonging, of quiet support that asked nothing of me except my presence. Maria spoke about a brother who only showed up when he needed money. Elfrida shared how she had to revise her will after discovering that her grandchild viewed her as their retirement plan. What hurts the most, I admitted, isn't the money I gave them. It's realizing I never had the love I thought I did. Renat, Elfrida said, her voice calm with the wisdom of 80 years, real love can't be bought or sold. If you have to pay for it, it was never real. Her words soothed the raw places in me. She was right. All this time, I'd been buying attention, not love. I'd been funding an illusion. You know what I've discovered, I told my new friends. Loneliness surrounded by people who don't love you is far worse than being alone. At least now, when I'm by myself, I have true companionship. Everyone laughed, and we raised our glasses to newfound clarity. That night, after they had all gone, I sat in my garden, staring up at the stars which seemed brighter than ever. Or perhaps it was simply my eyes, finally clear after years of blindness. For the first time in my adult life, I was completely free financially. No one depended on me, and I had no obligations to support anyone but myself. Instead of frightening me, that truth filled me with energy. I could travel whenever I wished. I could restore my house, buy myself good clothes, donate to causes that truly mattered to me. I could invest in my own future rather than bankroll the present of the ungrateful. Freedom tasted like hope, and for the first time in years, I genuinely wanted to plan for the rest of my life. A month after the social worker's visit, I felt I had stepped into a new chapter, one where I was finally ready to look forward, no longer bound by the demands of the past. At last, I felt I had truly won the long battle. My life had settled into a calm, steady rhythm. I ate breakfast slowly, read the paper, tended my garden, and sometimes shared lunch with Eleanor or one of my new friends. In the afternoons, I devoted time to the things I had abandoned for years. I picked up painting again, a passion I'd shelved long ago when I turned myself into Ethan and Mara's personal financial advisor. But one Thursday morning, as I stood at my easel sketching flowers, the door opened and Weber stepped inside, his face grave enough to chill my blood. "Renat, we need to talk," he said, his voice low. "Ethan and Mara have formally filed a petition with the family court to have you declared legally incompetent and to request guardianship." The words landed like a boulder on my chest. I'd known it was a possibility, but hearing it aloud made it terrifyingly real. "So that means they could control my money?" I asked quietly. "If a judge decides you're incapable of managing your affairs, yes," Weber explained, "they could be appointed as your guardians, which would give them full authority over your finances." I sank onto the sofa, feeling as if the room itself were collapsing. Nothing compared to this betrayal. My own son trying to have me legally stripped of control, just to seize the money I'd saved all my life. "What evidence could they even have?" I asked, my voice hoarse. "You've seen for yourself I'm perfectly competent." Weber sighed. "They've submitted statements from 3 so-called witnesses claiming you've been behaving erratically. They've also filed unpaid medical invoices, claiming you've ignored them and allege that you've been stockpiling medications without using them." "But that's a lie," I protested. "I don't have a single unpaid bill, and I certainly haven't hoarded any pills." "I know," Weber said calmly, "but they've fabricated documents that look persuasive. They even brought in a note from Dr. Lehman claiming you refused to cooperate with a psychiatric evaluation, and they're spinning that as proof of cognitive decline." The cunning behind it all sent a shiver through me. It was clear Max and Mara were willing to bend any truth to serve their aims. Yet even as fear rose in my chest, I recognized something else. This time, I wasn't alone. I had a skilled attorney, new friends, and, most importantly, the clarity I'd fought so hard to reclaim. They had twisted my refusal to undergo an unnecessary evaluation into proof of mental decline. They'd turned my instinct to protect myself from them into evidence that I needed protecting. "Who are the three witnesses?" I asked. Weber flipped through the file. "Mara, of course, a neighbor named Davis, and Mr. Green, your pharmacist." Davis was the man across the street, always annoyed when my friends parked too close to his driveway. Green was indeed my longtime pharmacist, and I couldn't fathom why he'd signed anything against me. "I need to speak to Mr. Green," I said. That afternoon we went to the pharmacy together. Green looked both nervous and embarrassed. "Mr. Morgan, it's good to see you," he said, his face flushing red. "I heard you signed a paper saying I was behaving strangely with my medications," I said calmly. He scratched his head. "Your daughter-in-law came by a few weeks ago. She said she was worried about your health and asked if I'd confirm you weren't taking prescriptions properly. I told her you mostly bought vitamins, sometimes aspirin, no regular prescriptions. But she brought a form, said it was for insurance paperwork. I signed it without realizing it was for a court case." Weber stepped in. "Mr. Green will need a statement clarifying that my client has no issues with medication." "Of course. I'm terribly sorry," Green replied. Leaving the pharmacy, we headed to Davis's house. When Weber knocked, Davis opened the door, his expression openly hostile. "Mr. Davis," Weber began, "we understand you signed a declaration about my client's behavior. Could you elaborate?" "Yes, I did," Davis said gruffly. "He's been acting odd, putting cameras everywhere like he's in a war zone, strangers coming by yelling at his family in the street." I took a breath, steadying myself. "Mr. Davis, those cameras were installed to protect me from people who'd already broken into my home. The strangers were just friends visiting, and I wasn't yelling without cause. I was defending my property." "See? That's exactly what a crazy person would say," Davis sneered. It was clear reasoning with him was pointless. His testimony was based on shallow observations, twisted into malice. That evening, Weber and I sat down to plan our defense. "Renat," he said, "we need an official mental competency evaluation from a reputable expert. I'll refer you to Dr. Moore." The next morning I met Dr. Moore, a woman in her early 50s with kind but discerning eyes. "Mr. Morgan," she said, "I'll ask you a series of questions and give you a few tests. Please answer honestly." For 2 hours she tested my memory, reasoning, financial understanding, and emotional health. She gave me cognitive exercises, asked me to solve math and logic problems, even had me copy shapes and respond to hypothetical scenarios. When she finished, she smiled warmly. "Your results are well above average for your age. Not only are you mentally competent, your cognitive abilities are excellent." "Doctor," I asked, "why would my family do this?" "Based on what you've told me and the records I've reviewed," she said, "this is a textbook case of elder financial exploitation. Unfortunately, it's more common than most people realize." I left her office with mixed feelings, relief that my clarity had been validated and sorrow that the lawsuit was very real and had to be fought. That afternoon, Eleanor convened an emergency meeting of our gardening group. When I told them about the petition, outrage filled the room. "Renat," Maria said, "we'll testify for you. We've seen how well you're doing these past weeks." "More than that," Cynthia added, "you're sharper and stronger than many people half your age." Elfrida, the wise 80-year-old, nodded firmly. "You have us standing with you. Don't let them break your resolve." Clarity gripped my hand. "Renat, dear," Elfrida said firmly, "children trying to have their parents declared incompetent to seize their assets isn't new. For generations, the greedy have done it. But you have something most victims don't: clear records, a solid attorney, and friends who can testify for you." Her words gave me hope. I was no longer alone in this fight. I had a circle of strong friends who had witnessed my transformation and were ready to stand with me. "You know what's saddest about all of this?" I said, my voice tight. Max and Mara are willing to destroy any chance of real reconciliation just for money. Even if I were willing to forgive everything until now, there's no going back after this. And maybe that's for the best, Cynthia replied gently but with resolve. At least now you see exactly who they are, and you can act accordingly. That night, for the first time since this nightmare began, I cried. Not from regret, but from grief. I mourned the son I thought I had, the dream of a loving family, the illusion that unconditional love had been returned. Yet out of that sorrow came something new, a steel determination not to let anyone strip me of more than just money, but also my dignity and freedom. 3 weeks later, the hearing arrived. I woke early, put on my best black suit, and looked at myself in the mirror, with a resolve I had never felt before. Today, not only my mental capacity would be weighed, but my worth as a human being, my right to live free from abuse, my value beyond a bank account, would be judged. Weber arrived at 7 a.m. to review our strategy one last time. Renat, remember, he said, the burden of proof is on them. They must convince the court you're incompetent. We just have to show that you're not. And if the judge is biased? I asked, steadying my voice. Judge Miller is known for fairness, Weber reassured me. I've reviewed his prior cases. He doesn't automatically side with families. He's careful about protecting the rights of older adults. We left the house together, driving toward the courthouse, my heart a mixture of nerves and quiet strength, as if I were stepping into the final battle to defend my own honor. The hearing began at 9 o'clock sharp. In the hallway I saw Ethan in a new suit, probably purchased just for the occasion, and Mara dressed in black as if attending a funeral. Perhaps it was the funeral of our family. When our eyes briefly met, Ethan quickly looked away, but Mara met my gaze with an icy stare, as if to remind me this was nothing more than a business transaction. Their attorney was an older man, polished and confident, the kind of composure born from winning cases like this before. As he launched into his opening statement, his strategy was clear. Portray me as an aging, confused man, manipulated by outsiders into cutting myself off from my loving family. Your Honor, he said gravely, Mr. Renat Morgan has shown a significant decline in his mental faculties in recent months. He abruptly terminated all financial support to his son and daughter-in-law without reasonable explanation. He installed unnecessary security systems out of unfounded fears, and has isolated himself from loved ones under the influence of neighbors and an attorney exploiting his vulnerability. Each carefully chosen word tried to turn my independence into evidence of dementia, my reclaimed freedom into outside manipulation. Then they called their first witness. Mara walked to the stand as though auditioning for an Oscar. Tears streamed down her face as she described how I had completely changed, how I had become hostile and paranoid, how I had cut myself off from the family who loved me. Your Honor, she said in a trembling voice, Renat was always such a gentle, devoted father, but ever since those people came into his life, he's different. He avoids us, won't answer calls, installed cameras everywhere like preparing for a war. I'm afraid my father no longer knows who truly loves him. Watching her, I felt both sadness and astonishment at her performance. Yet inside, my anger had shifted into steady strength. I knew the truth, and this time I had allies, the law, and solid evidence on my side. Weber placed a reassuring hand on my shoulder and whispered, Don't let their words shake you. The truth is with us. I drew a deep breath, ready for my turn, not just to protect my assets, but to defend my dignity and my right to live free from the chains they sought to place on me. To me, he's like a second father, Mara said tearfully on the stand. It's heartbreaking to watch his mental state decline. We only want to make sure he gets the care he needs. Lies, wrapped in carefully staged tears. When Weber began his cross-examination, cracks in her polished performance quickly appeared. Mrs. Schuster, Weber asked calmly, Can you tell the court the last time you called my client simply to check on him without asking for money? Uh, we've talked about lots of things, Mara stammered. Can you give me a date? I I don't recall exactly. Is it true that you and your husband held a wedding ceremony without inviting your father? It was just a very small event, she said, eyes lowered. And when Mr. Morgan asked about the wedding, did you tell him you only invited special people? Mara's face flushed crimson. Those words were taken out of context. What context could possibly make that acceptable? Wasn't your father special? Weber pressed. Mara couldn't provide a convincing answer. Then came Ethan. Seeing my son take the stand, swearing to tell the truth while preparing to twist it, was one of the most painful moments of my life. This was the boy I had once carried in my arms, the son I had dedicated my entire life to raising. My father has always been very generous with us, Ethan testified, but lately he's become unpredictable and unreasonable. We're afraid he's being manipulated by outsiders. When Weber began his questioning, the facade completely slipped. Mr. Morgan, Weber asked, how much money have you received from your father over the past 3 years? I don't know the exact amount, Ethan muttered. Would $33,400 sound about right? Weber's voice was steady, cutting through the silence. Perhaps. My father has always been generous, Ethan said, trying to dodge. And in those 3 years, how many times did you visit your father without asking him for money? The courtroom went silent. Ethan stared down at the floor, unable to answer. Is it true, Weber continued slowly, that you and your wife entered your father's home without permission and went through his private papers? Ethan swallowed hard, his hands clenching, and I saw on my son's face not arrogance, but a flicker of fear as the truth threatened to break free. Private papers? Ethan tried to defend himself. We were only worried about Dad. Is it true, Weber pressed, that you brought an attorney to pressure him into signing a power of attorney? We just wanted to help him manage his finances. At 35, Weber leaned in. Do you still need your 71-year-old father to cover your rent? Ethan went silent, unable to give a reasonable answer. Then came Davis, the witness who claimed to see my so-called odd behavior. But when Weber drilled into the details, Davis admitted he'd never spoken directly to me. Everything he'd said was based on shallow observations and personal bias. Next, Dr. Lehman testified that my refusal to undergo a psychiatric evaluation was proof of decline. Weber immediately submitted Dr. Moore's report, which completely refuted that claim. Then it was our turn. Mr. Green, the pharmacist, explained how Mara had tricked him into signing a statement that distorted my medication habits. Dr. Moore testified about my excellent mental condition and presented flawless cognitive test results. Summer, the hardware store owner, confirmed that my decision to cancel automatic transfers was thoughtful and rational. Eleanor and my friends from the garden club spoke about my clarity, renewed strength, and ability to maintain healthy social ties. Finally, it was my turn to testify. I stood with quiet dignity, carrying the weight of 71 years of experience, wisdom earned through pain and resilience born from adversity. Weber guided me through my story. The $33,400 drained from me over 3 years, the humiliation of being excluded from my own son's wedding, the relentless manipulation, the invasions of privacy, the legal threats. Mr. Morgan, Weber asked at last, why did you decide to stop financially supporting your son and daughter-in-law? Because I finally understood that what I received from them wasn't love, I answered, voice steady. It was a business transaction disguised as family. My money was welcome. I was not. Do you regret your decision? I only regret that it took me so long to make it, I said. The plaintiff's lawyer tried to rattle me on cross-examination, but I answered every question clearly and calmly. When he implied that my new friends had manipulated me, I explained that for the first time in years, I had relationships built on mutual respect, not financial dependence. In his closing remarks, Max's lawyer insisted I had been influenced. Weber's rebuttal was devastating. Your Honor, what we have here is not an elderly man losing his faculties, but a father who has finally found the strength to free himself from years of financial and emotional abuse. The plaintiffs have provided no credible medical evidence of incapacity. What they have shown is frustration that their source of income has chosen to protect his own resources. Judge Miller retired to deliberate. 2 hours that felt like 2 years. When he returned, his expression was solemn, but there was clarity in his eyes, and my heart pounded in my chest. After reviewing all the evidence, Judge Miller spoke in a steady voice. It is clear to this court that Mr. Renat Morgan is fully competent. Professional psychiatric evaluations confirm his cognitive capacity. His financial decisions, while perhaps disappointing to his family, are entirely rational and within his rights. My heart pounded, a wave of relief washing over me. Furthermore, the judge continued, the evidence shows that this petition was driven by financial interests, rather than any genuine concern for Mr. Morgan's well-being. The request for guardianship is hereby denied. I had won. Not just the case, I had reclaimed my freedom, my dignity, and my right to live free from the abuse of those who once claimed to love me. As we left the courtroom, I saw Ethan and Mara speaking heatedly with their attorney. Mara shot me a look of pure resentment before storming out. Ethan glanced back at me one last time. For a fleeting second I thought I saw regret, but it vanished too quickly to hold on to. That night, Eleanor hosted a small gathering at my home with all our friends. We raised our glasses to justice, freedom, and the solidarity of those brave enough to stand by the truth. Renat, Elfrida said warmly, today you didn't just win a trial. You reclaimed your life. She was right. For the first time in years, the future was entirely mine. I could travel, love, create, and live without fear, guilt, or manipulation. 3 months later, I sold the old house and moved into a cozy apartment near the city center. Half of the proceeds I donated to organizations protecting seniors from family abuse. With the other half, I began living the life I had always dreamed of, traveling across Europe, taking art classes, volunteering to support people who had once felt as isolated as I had. I never heard from Ethan or Mara again. Through others, I learned they'd moved into a smaller apartment, and Mara had finally taken a job for the first time in years. Perhaps hardship would teach them what my generosity never could, the value of independence and honest work. Some nights, sitting on my new balcony beneath a sky full of stars, I think about the man I was just a year ago. Fearful, manipulated, convinced I had to buy love. That man is gone. In his place stands someone who understands a simple truth. True love has no price, and freedom is never too expensive. My name is Renat Morgan, 72 years old, and I've finally learned the most important person I must love and protect is myself.